Chippewa Valley Community Television and the City of Eau Claire present the Eau Claire Redevelopment Authority meeting.
The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.
The first order of business is the minutes from the meeting of May 18th, 2016. They were in your packet. Everybody's had an opportunity to read them. Are there any additions or corrections anyone would like to bring up? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? Did somebody second? Dave?
I'll second.
Okay. Marty second? Okay.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Financial statements. Kelly?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Your operating expenses for May totaled $1,442 and included $1,432 for electricity and $10 for postage. Acquisition expenses totaled $5,919. $4,815 was for Phase 2 environmental work in the Cannery District, $1,000 for a trail plan near the family video property, and $104 for a moving payment to Silver Mine Stone Company. Next on your agenda, you're going to be approving a bid for demolition, and I just wanted to let you know there's some other expenses that aren't included in that, such as the debris outside 1807 Oxford. That's going to be $6,062, so you'll see that in the future on here. And then we also have some like underground storage tanks over there and maybe some surprise ones as we're doing demolition that'll come up too. So.
Any questions on the financials as presented? All right, thanks, Kelly. If there's no questions, can I get a motion to approve the financial statements as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the financial statements as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Financials are approved. The next order of business is motion to award a demolition bid to Heartland Contractors for properties in the Cannery Development District. Kelly?
Heartland was a lower bid if you look at these bolded numbers here. So the total cost for the demolition is going to be $97,492.26. Except if anything comes up, as we're demolishing it, there might be some other stuff, but.
Any questions from the board? Seems to be a bit of a difference between them and TRB.
Yeah, we're not quite sure.
Was that mileage?
We're not quite sure. They were quite out of the ballpark compared to everyone else. So.
Wow. Or do they know something we don't?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to award the demolition bid to Heartland Contractors, the lowest bid?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded to award the demolition bid to Heartland Contractors for the properties in the Cannery Redevelopment District for approximately $97,000. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Item number 5 is the review of updated conceptual plans for the Cannery Redevelopment District. In our last meeting, I had asked Michael to send all of the members the various plans that we have been looking at the last several months so that we can make comparisons, and I think, Michael, you're ready to take us through those?
I can do that. What we were planning on doing is taking the information and feedback that you gave us at the last meeting and showing you 3 new options based on your feedback. I think that's a good starting point, and then if you want to compare later, we can do that. Everybody did receive those, correct? I did email those out to everybody? Okay. So with that, I'd like to have Phil and Chris come up and run us through these new renderings based on your feedback from last month.
Thank you. I don't know if many or if any of you have met Chris Zaleski. Chris is the landscape designer in our office that has the amazing capabilities to make these things happen. We've got a couple of other landscape designers in our office, so just so you know, when we work on things, it's really a true collaboration of ideas that help formulate the things that you see. So I'll get this stuff started, and Chris will probably run through some of the other perspectives that we've got to show you, and then we'll have some dialogue with you and kind of talk about what kind of outcomes would be good from this meeting. But taking this back to the prior plan that we had discussed last time, I kind of zoomed in a little bit to the areas of discussion from our last meeting. In particular, what we're calling the Uptown Cannery Mixed Use District. We had some feedback as to, developing more of a green buffer between the trail and the development area, and the concern about using or having more mixed use in an area that's north of Platt Street than what some of the members felt would be sustainable from a business model perspective. And it really was something that we were hoping to get feedback like that on, so we could kind of expand the discussion a little bit, and that's kind of what happened. We've met with Mike on a couple occasions since the last meeting to kind of review some of our preliminary designs, and when it all settled in, we came up with three new approaches, and we want to run those through you. Again, we're shifting model, we're shifting type of reviews so we can get a better perspective of how buildings mass and how they place on the site. So we're using the topography that's on the site and draping the image over that topography so you kind of see the context. Sometimes when you look at the plan graphics and you see all that green, it's all on one plane, but you kind of see what happens with the bank here, how it dramatically cuts off, and really how in the course of that open space planning we developed that trail edge really right at the edge of that precipice, I'll call it in some cases. But I'll let Chris run over some of the particulars of this, and we'll move through it then.
Hello. So the three different options we came up with really differ in how we handle this road here. The first option is what you've seen before, just like this, where it jogs slightly through. The second option really jogs the road at about a 90-degree angle through here, and then the third option takes it and ends the road in two parking lots. So you really have these two different nodes. So with this option, we have commercial in this location with no parking on the backside to open that potential commercial office building to the river. Commercial on this side to, which could be a hotel, it could be an office building, it could be a variety of different things. What's nice about that is you have two large buildings flanking either side of the street to give you a nice street frontage. Then moving this way, we have apartments with mixed use on each corner. And then across the street from that, we open up to green space, which could be park, it could be plaza space, it could be a variety of different things. Moving over to this corner, we have apartments with commercial on the corner, small commercial. It could be like a bakery, a coffee shop, a laundromat, something of that nature. But something that could provide use to the tenants that live in that area. The blue that you see on the backside here is what we are calling townhomes, which would be row homes, but could be one story, could be two story, something that has a better street frontage for the residential neighborhood to this side. And then this perspective is down it's the same option, but it's down the river, facing the other way. So Oxford's here, Platt's here, and Maple's here. So in this option, we have the senior living facility in this location with the parking lot, surface parking lot on this side. Apartments here, flanked by apartments there, and then another row of apartments here with townhomes on this side. And then all the parking for all these apartments would be handled underground. And they would come in on either this end. In this option, we have them coming in on the side here. And then in this option, we have them coming in through here. So they're all coming in off of not on a main street.
Chris, you want to talk about the parking up by the 1807 Oxford building and the two commercial ones up front there?
Yes. These two, right?
Yes.
So the parking for these two, this larger one, which could potentially be a hotel, hotels have significant demands and specific demands for parking, specifically surface parking, and they very rarely ever waiver on them. So we felt like this lot in the back corner here was a good opportunity to house a potential hotel with a lot of parking on the backside, or get a significant amount of parking for this other potential office building on the backside as well. And then street parking along the front. So there would be no parking on site for this one. All the parking for this commercial building would be on the backside of this one.
And in this scenario, it would be the same for the 1807 Oxford building too. The parking would be behind that bigger building on the west side.
So just to talk about the outdoor space a little bit on this one, we have a large amount of green space, which could be public, could be private, right along the river that expands this park corridor down to this building. And then we have another green space connecting this street down to the river and this street down to the river. So everything starts to feel much more connected along the river. Do you have any questions about this one?
Would that be, when you say down to the river, those would be what we talked about as overlooks? They would be made as that?
Yes. So it'd be connecting what we have planned for an overlook here with this streetscape here. So you'd be able to walk all the way down to the overlook there. So if you have no more questions, I'll move on to the next option. So this option looks at really jogging the street around through that development. Starting at Family Video again, the same commercial building with parking on the backside, but this office building has been rotated to add some surface parking in between these two buildings. And then again, street parking along here. One of the downsides to that, in my opinion, is you don't get the same street frontage from a building standpoint as you do in the other option, but you solve some of the parking issues that you may have. Moving to the north, we added two smaller separate commercial, which could be a brewery, could be a restaurant, could be a variety of different things. And then moving west along Platte, we have apartments with commercial anchoring each corner. Again, those would be small commercial, could be like a small sandwich shop, could be, again, a laundromat. And then on either side of these two small commercial lots, we have apartments with commercial on each corner, and then behind that we have a small surface parking lot, which provides access for underground parking for all these apartments. And then moving on to the next angle, you'll notice that all these different options have the same perspective, so it'll help you stay orientated. So townhomes, so this is Maple Street. So we have townhomes along the river here, which adds a great amount of outdoor space for those units. Apartments with townhomes on this side. You'll see that on every option we tried to add townhomes to this lower density residential side. And then senior living facility here with surface parking again. So underground parking for the apartments could come in here, and if the townhomes found out that they needed or wanted underground parking, they could come in along Maple Street here. So in this option, instead of adding a large amount of green space all the way along the river, the green space sort of stops at this node and becomes a much larger green space in here. So the park really starts to feel connected down to this point, but then stops at this sort of intersection, is continued through the trail. So we have that same open corridor all the way down through, but so instead of it being a park this time, it's more of a streetscape. You're still open to go down, but still go down the sidewalk and still go to the overlook, but it'll be like a downtown streetscape, basically, which is still a great walking environment. Any questions on this one? So this one is the contained option. This is where we stop north of Oxford in a parking lot right here, and then Maple ends into a parking lot here. So there's no through road connecting the two. In this option, we got rid of the commercial building on this side of the street and just had one commercial building on this side, and added a large amount of surface parking. So that will hopefully solve all the issues with any surface parking you would need in this area. Moving down the street, we have two smaller commercial buildings here and here. Again, those could be the restaurants or breweries like we talked about. And then large apartments here and here with commercial on either side. And then the underground parking would be handled back in this corner. Then you have a surface parking lot to handle some of the commercial. Moving to the other angle, coming off of Main Street here, we have apartments with townhomes on one side, and then apartments with townhomes on one side, and then the senior living facility along the river. So you have residential along the residential side, and then the senior living facility opens up to the park space on this side. Again, that could be public or private depending on how it's handled. But it is rather nice to put a senior living facility with that much green space right next to the river. I know that's very important nowadays. So then the corridor coming off of this street would be more of a park space or plaza type corridor with no street growing through it. And then you have buildings on either side, which is a really nice pedestrian space. And then we have a small outdoor space here again. So again, everything feels somewhat connected, but there's not these larger green spaces all the way through. Okay, so I ran through that pretty quick.
Is any of that in any of the three plans within a floodplain? It is not. Okay.
Can you put up 6, please? To me, 6 is getting closer to at least where I thought we were headed and where I thought you were headed, and it does some nice things. I'd like to talk a little bit about the open park space, green space area that you're showing, which is substantial. We haven't really talked very much. We had a young lady in here who was doing a graduate program from Madison. I think Phil, you saw her, and she did some work suggesting maybe a public garden in this space or something. But we haven't really flushed out what we're going to do there, nor have we really talked about what we would program to turn that into a community space, not the neighborhood park, which is flipping up to the north. So I'm going to offer you maybe 2 suggestions. Mike, if you'd have them put 1 up first, and then 2. In some of her work, which was, creative, grad school ambitious, like all of it, but she was drawing off of Millennium Park in Chicago. And the person who did that is done. It's hard for us to relate to that with 40-story buildings around Grand Park ringing the thing. However, that same landscape architect, and you're all nodding, I'm sure you know, it's done stuff on a different scale with multifamily or this mixed use in other places around the United States and Europe. And I just pulled 2 quickly out of something I had, but it shows you how that garden space might be programmed to tie in to the other design. It still doesn't leave us, though, with any destination to bring people down there, aside from the nice walk through whatever gardens and lawn you have there. When we allowed the Children's Theater to remain early on in this district, that was a fairly controversial decision. They had just started, they badly wanted to remain, but the idea was, and what they sold us on, was the idea that we might integrate that use somehow into the public space beyond. So if you put up slide 2, or my picture 2, that's a very simple open-air stage. I think that's Regent's Park in London. But it allows very small theater groups to do something. You carve out a natural amphitheater down by the river. You've got the Children's Theater right there. Now, my kids are graduates of all of those children's theater programs. We had a lot of good ones in Eau Claire, and my son was at the Guthrie in the fall. I mean, there is a lot of good things happening there. And as good as the Performing Arts Center for the Confluence is for our community, the rates don't allow this summer stock type of stuff as easily. I think that, both for music and for theater, could really tie those uses together. And you can use that green space, not just as a lawn, but maybe as a combination of both. What I'm trying to do is get us to focus a little, and whether it's this or something else, I'm trying to get us to focus on something where the community gets some tangible programmed benefit from that space. Because if you can't get the numbers up in this area, the development isn't possible, to me. Not like it's being shown here.
When we did the open space plan, there was considerable amount of public space that was programmed into that design. And that had a performance space with it. And it, as we would expand that, I mean, we had ideas well beyond what was presented, but some of the stuff that we talked about was how to engage the people who are going to live on site. And how to engage the people who are going to work and come to the site as well. And how do you draw the community to that space? So you got three of those components playing into this. And one of the charges that we've got at this stage, at this juncture, is to look at what are the redevelopment strategies that we want to approach. And then we can, make sure that we've set aside, or you've set aside appropriate spaces for the other uses. So if public space wants to be a greater component in here than we showed in the open space plan, I think we have to then marry that to the redevelopment strategies that this group is really charged with. And we would be, more than happy to come and show the program space in the green areas comparable to this.
I agree with every word you said. What I think we learned, and personally, I learned the hard way because it was counterintuitive to me in Phoenix Park, but you really have to do that first. Because if you don't set that first, you really don't have any idea of what development you need to follow consistent with that, both in use and to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to put up one of your slide 6s again. Now my other concern, since it's on the agenda later, the commercial space that we're showing to the south, to me, if you really want mixed-use residential development, it's far easier to do it to the south. Where are the residents likely to come from? In Phoenix Park, we had to create employers who would generate those needs for housing.
Mm-hmm.
Here you've got Mayo Health System a block away.
Mm-hmm.
But the traffic count is on Madison. They're on Madison or off Madison. That's where the multifamily mixed use has the best chance, which means working with Family Video and those owners to maybe get that use elevated. But to simply splice commercial use sandwiched in between existing use, which is of a much
lower density.
Yes.
I mean, the traffic volumes are less.
That's a real challenge.
Well, one of the thoughts
especially for a hotel. I'm sorry.
I'm talking I believe we're talking in the area north of Platt Street.
Well, now I'm switching south. I'm
Okay.
switching south to your two reddish building, yep, right there.
Okay.
See, because whatever you do with the public space, the more grand the public space becomes, the harder the increment becomes to generate it. And while I
Right.
think some of this ringing the park can help, the highest increment generating sites are to the south,
Correct.
in my judgment. And we have taken virtually, or we are about to take, almost all of them off the table here. And try and splice in two uses, leaving the others in place, where I think we're kidding ourselves if we're going to get, again, that kind of increment out of those spaces. I don't think that's a particularly good hotel site behind a Quick Trip.
It could be commercial as office as well, but we're using these as placeholders as far as the building massing goes now. Obviously, as you market this space and you see, and we develop this further. Again, this is very much in the concept stages.
We're early days, but we're to the point where we've got to start talking about moving it into money. So I'm not
Right.
being critical of the massing or the blocks or what you're showing, because, clearly we're going to have that kind of mass down there.
Right,
Frankly, you could have higher mass down there if you take that whole swath.
right.
But But the mass, at some point, has to translate to dollars to fund the improvements for the park. And I don't want anyone deceiving themselves that you're going to get any kind of hotel in that space between the Children's Theater and a Quick Trip. You're just not. Some other use is going to have to come out of there. And if that's the case, you know, the decisions we make on both sides of the street for what remains and what comes out are going to have a huge financial implication if you're trying to fund something grander to the north.
So all of our objectives looked at blocks of redevelopment in these two very visible, very formative areas in the front or near the front of the development district. You obviously have the family video, which is almost the elephant in the room, because that is the placeholder that's going to be anchoring that redevelopment. And so you really have three sites in here that to choose as to what those redevelopment options are. Could I open that up for some discussion as to what kind of takeaways we want to put into these spaces? Yes. Okay, please, if somebody can.
Well, clearly, family video is not in the district. It's privately held. Those owners are trying to figure out, I think, themselves what redevelopment opportunities might exist for them, or whether they want to just keep the existing use, and that's all fine. But to me, that single site unlocks a lot of the rest of it to the north. And consensually, or however we reach some sort of understanding with them of what might be possible there, but that use has to upgrade to make a lot of the rest of this possible. If it can't, I think, again, it's going to force us down a different path. If it can, you can, not just commercial, but forget the commercial block on the riverside, you could put some of these higher density apartment complexes that you've seen in the Phoenix Park area. Those would work, or a hotel, on the family video site and the next two up, I think, till Platt, with lower density commercial on the other side of the street. At Platt, now you start mixing park and other uses, keeping your other uses to the west. But that's where your big green space really opens up in this plan, if you're going to program something. And to me, neighborhood park ought to be to the north, and more community uses, a broader draw, ought to be to the south. And the community uses are going to draw the apartments. It just is that simple. I mean, you know, the community use was programmed at Phoenix Park before the apartments came. So
correct. And I think in this scenario, with the modeling of a TID district having to have some of the front-end commitments in it before you can do the public improvements, the volume of residential units in this area is really going to enliven this public space. And that's why when we were looking at anchoring the mixed use on the ends of the building, it's really service what we're feeling and taking the direction we got from the last meeting, that it kind of serves the users, or serve the tenants of those areas. And it could be, you know, it could be anything from ice cream shop to specialty foods or whatever, but it's not or even the discussion from the public market perspective, what kinds of things that the district to do this in. But the point that I'm getting at is that from the public meetings that we had that talked significantly about blended incomes in this area, talked about the blended age groups coming into this area, and the number of units, and we haven't counted them up there, is going to be significant, and it's going to be concentrated in that one area, which, you know, is really where a lot of the increment for this TID district is going to come to as well. But
and just to push back, again, I don't fundamentally disagree with what you're saying, but there has to be some reason for those buildings to be there beyond the neighborhood park to the north. If you sacrifice all of the rest of it, honestly, that's not a great site to build those kind of buildings at that density, at that cost, particularly if you're trying to do an affordable housing component.
If I'm understanding this, this idea of this green space in here is very, very important to what you're saying as to the redevelopment of this area north of Platte. The area south of Platte, defining what those building uses are, is that critical at this stage in the planning efforts?
Only because I think the density, the more of the existing uses that remain to the south, the less opportunity there is for buildings that size at that increment to the north. I think that's still too ambitious. Now, the one way to counteract that is to use the public space as the anchor. Give the community a special space that will, why as a developer do I want to stick a building down there? If you don't give me something to tie to, the only way people are going to stick buildings down there is they're going to ask for enormous subsidies from the city of Eau Claire to do that. It doesn't work otherwise, because I can't get the rent. So, it has the potential to be a win-win, a special space for the community that can drive development to it. But I'm just saying we are sacrificing some of the best development sites to the south, hoping that we can make up that density to the north. And the more density you put to the north, you're sacrificing the green space that you also need to help make it work. So we've got some tough choices. If that vision is going to hold, we have some tough choices to make to the south, and we have some tough choices on what we can fund to make that community park area special. If we can't do it, then everything scales down. The uses scale down, the park scales down, it all scales down. So I'm going to be quiet now. I just, having thought about this since our last meeting, it's pretty clear to me those are the two choices. I'm not even saying one is inherently better than the other. I just don't want to shoot for the midpoint and think it's all going to work, because I don't think it is.
Great.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Phil, I think what Jeff is trying to do, and hopefully get some more comments from the board, but I know that you're really in the middle of exactly what the board wants. So I'd like everybody to jump in on this and give him a little more information so that he could do some of this planning. He's delivered 3 good-looking plans. I think Jeff's made some absolutely brilliant comments on this, and so I'd like everybody else to weigh in, please.
Mr. Johnson, would you put up number 6 again, please? Yeah. I'm not very imaginative, but could you trace the traffic flow off of 3rd down to Madison Street?
Down 3rd?
From 3rd.
That's 3rd right here. Comes down to Platte. Comes down here and then goes out to Madison Street.
Okay.
Or Oxford, yeah. Down Oxford, Platte, 3rd, up the hill.
Thank you.
What we're looking at on this plan is that this would be the line that would run as Oxford Street extended. When we talked about the changing of the types of roadways in there, not so much it would go all the way to what is on Thorpe Drive, but at least this would be a more ability to adjust traffic speeds, and it also becomes the entrance point for a lot of these underground parking areas. So it's more local traffic than cutover traffic. Some of the other plan that we started with had more flow-through in here that could become cutover traffic or incidental to not so much the tenants there. And the 3rd option looks at, segregating that so you don't have through traffic on it. So we're looking at it from 2 different traffic perspectives, or actually 3 different traffic perspectives, to kind of contain these spaces. Because the takeaway from our meeting last time is that we needed to address some of the issues north of Platte relative to the open space and the traffic circulation. So that's kind of where we're landing at right now.
Let me raise a hypothetical. Is so much of the key of this centered on the start being where family video is? If that property was not there or no longer family video, would that change a lot of what the planning could look like? Because brick and mortar, if Blockbuster is any indication, those types of facilities are going away.
I'll take a crack at that. Yes, it would change it substantially. We made a decision, when I say we, RDA, a long time ago, that and Quick Trip was not going to be in the RDA plan. I think as things have evolved, we would all agree that if we had that site, it would be advantageous, and as Jeff pointed out, it is certainly what most people would say underutilized in its present state. I don't think we should give up in either acquiring it or working with them to upgrade that site. Part of the reason behind what we're showing behind Family Video is that you do own that lot behind there. So part of our pitch to Family Video could be, if you won't sell it to us, would you consider doing a much bigger project? We could even enhance it with a lot behind it. We'd want you to go up and be a more modern, high-density type of use that we've been working with. So, keep that in mind. I don't think it's a dead deal. We have talked to them in the past, and they have said no, they do want to keep it, and they did have plans for it. But as you all know, things can change, and we should still try and work with them on, like I said, if we can't get it, maybe they would consider doing a more urban development. I agree with a lot of what Jeff says, but I'm not a fan of putting housing on Madison Street. I don't think that would be as desirable to people living there. I think the housing should be back. I think Jeff is hitting it right on the head on what our options are. We made a decision early on that we were keeping the Children's Theater. We weren't going to use Family Video and Quick Trip. So it kind of, from the start, we weren't, I think, picturing the grand area that the North Barstow District has turned into. So our decision point now is, do we hold out and try and resurrect that, or not resurrect, but create a new vision of higher density by trying to work with Family Video, or because of the decisions we've made in the past, are we going to have a more moderate entryway, which then, as staff has talked about it, we may have to have a more moderate park too, because you can't have a high amenity park unless you can get a high amenity developments to pay for it. So I think that's where you're going here with your decisions. You gotta decide, do we hold up and try and work with Family Video to see if we, because if your question is right on, Marty, if we get that, it changes things. If not, if we're okay with, somebody said the midpoint type of development, then we can proceed with that first part probably being a little less than what we're seeing in North Barstow and such. I have had several developers interested in that site for the housing. I really think of this area as housing heavy, and the diversity of housing that we heard when we had the listening sessions and such, that mixture of everything from market to senior to low income. Maybe we're high on the density, but I think those mixes can fit in there, and then we would probably relook at the park to downsize it somewhat to fit into the kind of that midpoint development you're talking about. So I think that's where we're really heading, is to, we got to make a decision on that, and then we can know then how we move forward and such.
Okay, good summary. Tom?
Thank you, Mike. First, just a quick question, Mike. What is the rough increment that we're projected or we're expected to generate from this tip?
Well, we had made a presentation to you at one time on that.
I know, I don't remember.
And you thought it was high, so I hesitate to throw out numbers now. And but as Dale and I talked yesterday, that will be, once we decide on kind of where you want to go, we'll come up. Jay and I will work on that. And
I'll rescind that question. Okay. So it doesn't matter which of these which we sort of look at, but it seems to me that all three of these kind of have these two zones, right? So you've got the south zone, it's primarily commercial, and the north zone, it's primarily residential of a variety of sorts. And, you know, looking at that from a bit of a business perspective, it seems to me that that's problematic. I mean, I'm hearing what Jeff said. It's the first thing that hit my mind when I heard hotel there. I thought, I don't know if I would put a hotel there that looked like that, you know, block off. But then I thought about, okay, well, what if the hotel was actually both of those buildings? Can we go back to one of the, and it doesn't matter which one, but any of them. So it's both, right? So I think of there's one in downtown Wausau that actually straddles the main street and has all these sort of overpasses that go over the street. And you know, that might be something that's more viable. Additionally, if you could connect those two zones, so we've got those two sort of white buildings there, which makes them look sort of anonymous and maybe even mildly mysterious. And that sort of exacerbates this visually for me, this sort of dichotomous zones, the zone over here, the zone over here. To my mind, if those commercial projects are viable to the south, then they absolutely have to tie in somehow in a significant way with the commercial enterprises to the north of them, the two white blocks, the Children's Theater and the current projected brewing project building. You know, if we could rethink that whole commercial frontage right there in sort of a blank slate, right? So what would it look like if we just assumed that it's ready to go from new? Okay. What type of commercial would go there? What type of commercial could go there? Because if you could get that all to be high-end commercial, and I think there's good reason why it might work that way, then I think you're going to generate the increment that you need to support the kind of community-based development to the north, where you've got a specific thing. I mean, we do have the hospital a couple blocks over here, and it's like an envision like some kind of commercial thing that has like hotels mixed with like specialist offices, you know, doctor's offices and things like that. They work there, and that's going to be relatively high-end. Then it's going to be high value added, but it's going to need to be closely connected with the stuff to the north too. So people who are there, you know, meander up to the north, or if they park back there, maybe walk up and catch a theater show up there in the park. But to me, those they can't be this two things like this. It has to be envisioned and sold and everything as a single entity. And if that means, you know, rethinking that a little bit, then it seems to me to be almost a must. And so, Mike, you had asked for direction. I think my attitude would be that we sort of need to say, okay, well, let's pause for a minute and see what additional variables can be put into play here, because I don't think, I don't know, Jeff would know way more than I would. Actually, everybody on this panel would know more than me, but to me that looks problematic from a profit perspective.
Okay. Any other comments? Dave?
Thank you. I'm not the visionary that Jeff is. I'm certainly not an economist. But as this conversation has evolved, it certainly seems to me that the family video lot is a linchpin of this thing. And I don't know who said it, but I think that pausing for a moment, or for some period of time, and bring more energy to bear on clarifying what can happen with that lot is a big determining factor as to what options we have going forward with that end of this development. I don't know what can be done. I don't know what should be done, but if we can bring more to bear on that part of it, I think we would all be better served.
I have one last thing I want to say while Will is sitting here, because he's on the agenda later for closed session. And well, let me back up. 1A and 1B. I I'm sure, now that we're on TV and people are watching this, I would envision sitting down with the owners of the Family Video site and looking at what might be done consensually. I think it's a great site. Whether you want to try and get a hotel in there, or I do think, frankly, multifamily works there. And I think if you're ever going to get multifamily to work over some commercial, they have experience with commercial. They'd be a good partner for that potentially. If that happened that way, suddenly the commercial or another higher density multifamily immediately north works. And now we get to the building that's going to occupy us next on the agenda. And here's where I struggle. I think the use, and he's excited and he's got a neat idea and a neat vision, and I definitely would like him part of this overall thing. The problem is that building where those refrigerators are. Now, if we have to get a higher increment, we're either going to force him into a higher increment solution that puts him at risk, frankly. That's my view, not his, but I think it puts him at risk, or we're going to forfeit a huge block of potential increment there that could be used to pay for the rest. So if we're really looking at this higher, what I'll call higher end community solution for the green space, then we have a very different discussion, I think, on that building. If we're not, if it's more modest and it doesn't matter, and less increment is needed out of that site, then maybe it works just fine. So there's where I'm torn. I mean, this has practical implications for the votes we're about to have. And if we've already, on some of these, carved some of the sites out. If we continue to carve the sites out, you can't pick up enough increment to the north. So I'll just get off the soapbox now.
Okay, so just in summary, it seems that the money making is between what we call the south end of the Cannery District. You call it the business district, and that would include let's make some overtures to the folks that own Family Video to see, working in concert, what can be done, because that's where we could make the money that makes everything else work. Is that basically what everybody is seeing? Okay. And you are right, the brewery project, which is really, really cool, it's just a big chunk of building there, and I think we were even told it may not all be necessary, but it's just an old building, man. It's tough to go through. So, all right. So let's maximize plans on that south end, as you've heard today, and also the idea of a community area that can be a draw. Along with the various housing, the housing on the north end. The thing that I look at when you go from Madison to Pico, make that left turn, north of that isn't going to be a great place for commercial, simply because it almost dead ends. If you don't have through traffic, like those two pink buildings you've got there that say commercial, if there's not enough through traffic, with the possible exception of professional offices, because people have to go there, retail isn't going to work. I mean, there just isn't enough traffic flow, in my opinion. So, okay. Do you have enough to go on now, Phil?
Yes. I think what I'm taking away from this is that we're going to pause. We're going to pause on the areas, especially south of Platte, and then we're going to revisit the areas to the north as that discussion develops to the south. I just want to make one point about the site here, which is on all the plans that we're showing in redevelopment, is that as we've gone through different redevelopment strategies in different locations, holding the corners are so important to the redevelopment areas. You do not have a site in Eau Claire that has as good of a shoreline exposure and access off of an arterial street for a restaurant as you do in this, for a riverfront restaurant as you do in this site. And that's kind of what our vision was by placing these things in these two plans. If other items can come in there, or it could go away and become public space, but we just wanted to make that comment about that one thing.
Can you move your cursor right over the building or the block you're talking about, please?
This building right there. That's the corner on Platte and Oxford that really, if you put something again over by the children's theater, let's say a placeholder in that lot as possibly cars could, but you could hold that corner there, and that's going to really make that and enhance that corner. But our takeaway is clear. We're going to pause for a little bit and then come back when that discussion is further along with family video.
Okay, appreciate your patience and your hard work. Thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Steve?
Could I just make one further comment to the north? And I know Phil is familiar with SEPTED. It's crime prevention through environmental design. And maybe you've considered it. I'm certainly no expert in it. This plan isn't as dense. I think the third option had even more internal space with less drive-through, which at least personally was my least favorite. But I would just make sure that you consider it. Maybe it's got some aspects that are good, but others, even on this design that I look at, you're looking at a new relocation of what would be identified as a community park, but with very few, as kind of SEPTED would say, eyes on that park. So your frontage is on 2nd Street, which at least so far is not a highly developed street. It's a low density or in transition street with some residential to the west and aging industrial commercial that we're clearing to the east. So it's not bad to put eyes on that street, but we're doing where we'd be investing is that large park space. Well, it's the side of a building, which the way a lot of those buildings are designed may have 0 windows or a stairwell or something like that at the edge of that building, as opposed to townhomes, or even if it is a senior living facility up there, and I know it's just a placeholder, but orienting it such that the L is to both the high dollar improvements in view and to keep sort of eyes on that park.
Good point. That's a very good point. And we'll vet that through SEPTED, and we'll tell you what those points are and what strategies we'd be accomplishing with that. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is closed session. The Redevelopment Authority may convene in closed session to discuss the terms and conditions of a redevelopment proposal for 1807 Oxford Avenue in the Cannery Redevelopment District from Wilk Glass / Brewing Project, which is permitted in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 19.851E. Can I get a motion to bring us into closed session, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're in closed session now. All right, we are out of closed session, back in open session, and we have item number 6, Executive Director's Report. Mr. Schatz?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, I wanted to make some introductions and some comments. Kelly? I want to make some introductions to you and some comments. Kelly Thompson will be going on maternity leave, but will not be coming back to be our financial assistance and our guard of the door as she's moving on to another position within the city. So we want to thank her for all the work that she's done. And then I'd like to introduce Josh Sullinger, who will be stepping in to assist us in the future. And then I'd also like to introduce Ray French, who is the new business assistant specialist working for me in the Economic Development Office, and he'll be coming to the meetings and assisting us here.
Okay, very good.
The couple updates. The Indoor Public Market Committee received a presentation from the consultant. He is recommending against a large indoor public market building. Instead, he is thinking of more of what he would call a district that would incorporate lots of food-related issues, and he's working with the committee kind of on that theory right now. And then on the HIA, they continue to meet, and I would turn the floor over to Mr. Klinkhammer in case he wants to. Since I was reprimanded last time about not allowing him to speak, I will give it to Mr. Klinkhammer.
The only thing I'd say is that there's a meeting scheduled. I think it's next Wednesday.
Yeah, I see.
Very well put. Okay.
And that's all I have.
All right. Then the last item is any announcement, directions, or correspondence. So, Michael, our next meeting is July 20th, is it? And yes, July 20th. I've also said I will not be able to attend, but I know our vice chair will do just an absolutely standout job, so I'm looking forward to that. So if there's no other announcement, directions, or correspondence, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Chippewa Valley Community Television and the City of Eau Claire present the Eau Claire Redevelopment Authority meeting.
The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.